Another of the more swarmy, critter-style forces of AOS is up next, although we move on from the furry, hairy Skaven to the more mushroomy green, red and yellow of the Gloomspite Gitz. And yes, this ever popular and hilariously fun faction is set to get some cool new rules in the latest edition of Age of Sigmar, so let's jump right in and see what exactly is brewing under the bad moon. With a focus on their own unique magic and loads of mushrooms and squigs, as well as a mixture of goblins and their bigger Troggoth buddies, there is quite a wide variety of playstyles for the Gitz, but they all share one common thing, and that is a devotion to the bad moon. This is the focus of their worship and adoration, and it is very much reflected in the battle trait for the army, which is called Under the Light of the Bad Moon. Now, this is quite a lengthy but actually quite simple battle trait, and it basically has two parts which make up the army's entire battle trait. One is the passive rule, which is Under the Light of the Bad Moon, which basically states that during the battle there are areas of the battlefield which will be under the light of the bad moon, and it can be in each table quarter or in the center of the battlefield, and if it's in a specific quarter then all your units in that quarter will get a buff. If the moon is in the center, then all Gloomspite Gitz units on the table get the buff, and the buffs will vary depending on what unit is being given it. So as you can see, your non-Squig Moon Clan units get +3 to their control score when they're under the light, your Squig units get to reroll their random movement, the Troggoth units get +1 to their save rolls, and then your Spiderfang units get critical hits on hit rolls of 5. So there are some really nice buffs there. They can really help you get onto objectives more easily and score them. They can help you get around the board more easily with your squigs, and they can just generally increase your output and your durability when it comes to units of your Spiderfangs and your Troggoths. The second part of the trait though, the bad moon's orbit, that means that the moon can actually move and spread its light elsewhere on the battlefield. So you can do this once per battle round at the start of the battle round, and the first time you do it, you pick which quarter the bad moon is going to start in, and then in subsequent battle rounds, you roll a dice, and on a 1 to 3, the moon will stay where it is, whichever quarter you picked, but on a 4+, it actually moves. So you can set up to do this from round 1, or you can wait to battle round 2 or 3 maybe to get it going if you definitely want those buffs later on in the game. It is completely up to you, but it's important to note that the moon follows a specific orbit. So when you do roll that dice at the start of the battle round, if you roll a 4+, then the moon makes a move, and the first time you do that, it moves to the center of the board, and then on the subsequent 4+, it moves to the opposite quarter of where you initially started it. But then if you roll another 4+ in a subsequent turn, it actually moves off the battlefield and you no longer get its buffs. So if, for example, you started the moon in battle round 1, you could then roll potentially a 4+ in round 2 and it would move to the center. Then if you rolled another 4+ in round 3, it would move to the opposite quarter where you started it. And then if you rolled another 4+ in round 4, the moon would be gone completely. So it is entirely possible for the moon to only be present in the game for 3 battle rounds if you're unlucky, or equally, if you're unlucky in some situations, it could end up staying in that same quarter that you started it in for the entire game. So it can be quite random and it can be quite swingy, and you may need to plan your battle tactics around that. But it is a very, very fun army rule, and it's quite a powerful one as well. It can bring some very significant buffs to potentially your entire army, especially when the moon is in that center of the battlefield position. Alongside that, of course, the Gitz do get a selection of battle formations, and the one we get shown today is the hilariously named Squigalanche. This is, as you might expect, all focused around your Squig units. And the rule, which is called Bouncing Fury, that means that each time a Squig unit charges, you add +1 to the attack's characteristic for their fang-filled gobs, or for the bigger varieties of that specific weapon on the bigger squigs. Now, this is quite a simple, straightforward buff. It just means you are encouraged to charge, and then you get better with a lot of your units when you do so. If you are going heavy on the squigs, this can definitely affect a lot of your units, and as we will see in just a second, even your basic run-of-the-mill squig herd can actually get up to quite a solid number of attacks with this rule, just to help them drown your opponent in a sea of gnashing teeth. It's definitely a rule and a battle formation that you can play into very well if you want to. It may not be amazing if you're just bringing, 1 or 2 units of squigs in your army, but if you are really going heavy in the squigs, you can get this rule to impact a good proportion of your units, and you can just use it to pump out an enormous amount of damage into your opponent. We also got to see one of the spells for the Gitz. This is called Sneaky Distraction, and again, like the previous battle formation, it's fairly simple and straightforward, which is kind of what you would expect from the Gitz. It's cast on a 7, and it basically puts an aura on your wizard that casts it that essentially reduces an enemy's hit rolls by 1 when they are wholly within 12 inches. So this can be quite a big area. It can very easily catch out a few enemies, and it's good not just for protecting your wizard himself, but if he is close to some other of your units in combat, he can potentially catch a few of your opponent's units in this aura as well, and provide a few -1 to hit debuffs on a couple of enemy units, which really can do wonders for keeping your generally squishy units alive a bit longer, but equally on your Troggoths, especially if they are under the light of the moon, they can be getting a bonus to their save and also be hit less by your opponent. So they can actually be quite a solid anvil with the light of the moon and this debuff on the enemy that's attacking them. And then finally, we also get to see a few of those sweet updated war scrolls. And for the Gitz today, we have Scragrott the Loon King, the Gobbapaloozas, the Humble Squig Herds, and then the terrain feature of the Bad Moon Loonshrine. Now, first up, Scragrott, he's actually dropped down to having just a 6-up save from his current 5-up, but he still has his 5-inch move and 6 wounds. So I mean, he's not super tanky by any stretch of the imagination, but he does still get his 4-up ward, which can make a little bit of a difference. He's still a 2-cast wizard, but he has also lost his +1 to cast. He is now just a regular, normal, run-of-the-mill 2d6 caster. And then in terms of his attacks, they are largely similar. He's got 4 attacks with the moon on a stick rather than 3, but they only wound on 4s now rather than 3s. So he does have a slightly higher maximum potential, but on average he's going to do about the same into most targets. His abilities have also been mixed up a bit. The Babbling Wand no longer lets you use a command without using any command points. Instead, it buffs up the power of your redeploys. So you use this when a friendly Moon Clan unit within 12 inches wants to redeploy, and you can count any 1 to 3 on their dice roll as a 4, so that unit can move a minimum of 4 inches when it redeploys. And I actually think this one is really nice. There is nothing worse than rolling a 1 on your redeploy and basically not making much of a difference to an enemy charge, or not being able to get away from the enemy shooting or get onto an objective that you were hoping to jump onto. So this is just a nice bit of reliability on your redeploys, and I think that's a very good command ability to use. So this is a strong rule, I think, and it will be really helpful when you just need to make those redeploys a bit more impactful. Fangs of the Bad Moon is still his spell, and it has also changed quite dramatically. It's no longer cast on a 3 anymore, it's gone all the way up to a 7. But for that huge increase, I mean, it must have got some kind of big buffs, right? Well, it's only an 18-inch range now instead of 24, so kind of no buff there. And then it still has the same effect. You roll a number of dice equal to the casting roll, and then you do mortal damage on each 3+ on those dice. So it's kind of not changed much at all, but just got pricier from a spellcasting perspective. So honestly, I don't think it's that great a spell. I would say, I suppose, the only positive of the increase in casting value is that it means if you do get it off, you will at least be rolling 7 dice at minimum for the damage. So with that 3+ to proc the effect, you will be looking at least 4 or so mortal damage whenever this spell does go off. So, I mean, that's not nothing, I guess, but it does seem like quite a hefty increase in casting value for not really any change apart from a nerf in the range of it. And then finally, he still has his Loon King's Entreaty, which is still his once per battle ability that basically lets you control the movement of the Bad Moon. You can choose whether it moves or stays still and stays where it is in that current battle round. And this is a very strong ability. If the moon is in the middle of the board and you have a few units that are scattered around the table, this can give you 2 full rounds of them getting those really sweet important buffs. So I think this is where a lot of his points are actually tied up. It makes him very, very good for ensuring that you get potentially that big important army-wide buff for 2 turns guaranteed, rather than relying or risking you rolling a 4+ and it moving off to the other table quarter. So I think this ability alone is really, really good, and it almost makes him worth taking just for that ability and that reassurance in some situations. One of your gangs of wizards, the Gobbapalooza, is up next, and they actually keep their profile relatively intact. They have 3 wounds and a 6-up save, which, I mean, yeah, it's not exactly anything to write home about. And they also still have that rather pathetic 1 attack each, which hit and wound on 4s with 1 rend and D3 damage, so that's not awful, but it's not exactly a good melee profile. They have also lost quite a bit in terms of their warscroll abilities. Hallucinogenic Fungus Brews still gives them that same 4-up ward in round 1, 5-up ward in battle round 2, and then finally a 6-up ward for the remainder of the game, but then they have also lost their 2 warscroll spells. Instead, Gobbapalooza No-Watts has kind of combined some of these abilities together. It's still done in your hero phase, but now it only goes off on a 3+ rather than automatically, so it's a lot less reliable. But then if it does go off, you get to pick one of the effects that is listed, and it can bring some relatively nice buffs to your units. They have the Glare Face Dance, Nasty Potions, and Mesmerize. So they have lost the Pedaled Potion, but what they do is Glare Face Dance gives +1 to run and charge rolls for a Gitz unit which is in combat range of the Gobbapalooza. Nasty Poisons still gives +1 rend to a unit within combat range, so it's worth noting this is no longer a 12-inch range you can do onto this. This has to be within 3 inches, which is the combat range in 4th edition. And then finally, Mesmerize, which as I said is no longer a spell. This allows you to choose an enemy unit within 12 inches and they can't use any commands. So they have taken a bit of a hit in terms of what they can do, but still they do have some quite useful abilities and ways to help your units around them. They can give some extra rend or deny commands to your opponent, so they might still be worth taking in your lists. It does just seem overall to be quite a bit less effective as a war scroll compared to the current one to me. As I mentioned earlier, we also get to see the new Squig herds. They have had a few notable and, to be honest, quite substantial changes. They are now slower, moving only d6 plus 3 rather than d6 plus 5 inches, and they've also had a monumental reduction in durability, only being 1 wound each now rather than the 2 they are at the moment. So I am kind of hoping that the points reflect this and they become maybe just a bit more cheap and hoardy, because let's be honest, 12 wounds with a 6-up save at their current 140 point cost would just be pretty bad. They do keep the same weapon profile with 3 gob attacks that hit on 4s and wound on 3s, and then 2 extra Squig Prodder attacks from the Squig herders, and as mentioned earlier, in the battle formation this can jump to 4 attacks per Squig, so with 10 in a unit that could be up to 40 gob attacks, which is, if nothing else, quite a good weight of dice to be throwing around. It does manage to kill off around 4 Chaos Warriors, even with their 3-up save, so it can do quite a bit of work in the right situation. They also still have their hilarious rules of Squigs Gone Wild, which lets you do some bonus damage to enemies, although it is not on a failed Battle Shock test anymore, obviously, with Battle Shock being gone. It is just when a model in the unit dies, you roll a d6, and then on a 5+, the enemy unit takes some mortal damage. And then you can also still bring a few squigs back across a game with herding squigs, which you roll for in your hero phase for each squig herder in the unit. And on a 2+, you can return D3 slain squigs, but on a 1, your squig herder gets eaten. And I mean, this is just a hilarious and fun rule. I really do like it just for the comedy factor of it, but it is also potentially quite potent in keeping the unit alive. You can potentially be bringing back 6 squigs in each of your hero phases because you've got 2 of the herders in a unit. So it can give you quite a good bit of recursion. It is just going to be funny whenever your herders do roll a 1 and they get eaten by their pack of squigs. Last but by no means least, we also see the Loonshrine terrain piece. This thing is a must take for you Gitz players, not just because it's free, but because it still brings some incredibly powerful buffs of bringing the light of the bad moon to all your units around it. Effigy of the bad moon means that units within 12 inches of the shrine are considered to be under the light of the bad moon. So even if it is in another table quarter, or you are in turns 4 or 5 and it may have gone completely, you can still get some of those really strong buffs on your units. So placing this where it is going to have the most impact in the late game can give you a really strong advantage as the game comes to a close. And then equally powerful, Moon Clan Lairs is also back, and still, like the Skaven and the Stormcast rules we saw over the last couple of days, brings some more recursion to the game. It lets you pick a non-hero, non-monster, non-war machine unit that has been destroyed, and then you can set it up at half strength within 12 inches of the shrine and over 3 inches from enemies. Now, this is a once per turn ability, and it is a command ability, so it does cost you a command point, and it is done at the end of your turn, so you can't even attempt to make a charge when you bring a unit back with it. But it is really nice. It means you can potentially recycle several units over the course of the game that may have been destroyed, and it can make it, if nothing else, that things like your endless tides of squigs are just even more endless. So it's a nice ability to have, and I mean the Loonshrine itself is just very good. Spreading that light aura and bringing you some recursion is 2 very strong abilities, and it also has 14 health with a 4-up save, so it's decently survivable in and of itself. And I mean, let's be honest, it does also look really cool. So if you are a Gitz player, definitely pick one of these up because they are good, they look cool, and they're just fun things to have. So that is the Gloomspite Gitz. I personally love the crazy nature of their rules. I think they look incredibly fun, and whilst there are a few nerfs here and there, I do think they still have a lot to get excited about with these rules. But as always, what do you make of these? And what else are you hoping to see from the Gitz as we go into AOS 4.0? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe for more Warhammer content from me, but until next time, I'll catch you later, guys.